I'd like to welcome you all here tonight. I'm going to let Frank start here. Now, Frank and I go way back to late last summer. But I spent a week with him in Texas and Missouri. I've been on the phone with him hours, and it feels like we've known each other for most of our life. We think it's a God thing that we're here together tonight and you're here with us. So I'm going to let Frank tell the history. Sometimes I get ahead and tell part of the history between you and me, but you can do that tonight.
Very good. Thank you, Kit. Thank you all for coming out. This is wonderful to be here. We took off about 2:30 this morning from Washington to get here. Glad we made it. We had about an hour and a half wait for our luggage. My son's Biff is over here. We're kind of a 2-horse outfit right now. His luggage came out on one carousel, and my luggage came out on another carousel after waiting for an hour and 20 minutes. So we're really happy to be here. Some of this time I'm going to have to turn around a little bit because I don't have a screen up there, and so I have to look. This last week was spring break up in Washington State, and I always like to say state. I belong to Washington State, not the other Washington. So it was spring break, and I had the blessing to have all 6 of my grandkids hanging out of my house for a period of time. They go from 17 years old to I have a pair of 11-year-olds. And the cool thing is they all like me. And I was talking to the pair of 11-year-olds, and they said, you know, you're speaking at these things, Grandpa. You've spoke a lot in your, in the history of being a university, but people don't know how fun you are. And I'm saying, Liam, Emma, I don't understand that. Says, so we've come up with some jokes for you. And so I used one of the jokes and I said it wrong in Texas, and Emma was not happy with me. But, so, what do you call a cow with no legs? Ground beef, yes. Okay, and then another one, what do you call a cow with 2 legs? Lean beef. But the really kicker is when I said that joke in Missouri, I was packing up from my computer, and a woman came up and she says, I'm very sorry, but someone wants to talk to you. And so around the back of this woman came about a 7-year-old young man. He came up and said, I've got another one for you. And I said, what is it? And he says, what do you call a 3-legged cow? And he says, tri-tip. and the lady says, I am so sorry, Frank. But I said, that's a kick. I made my evening for sure. So anyhow, tri-tip. Okay, so I have a fused ankle, so once in a while I stumble around a little bit. But just to give you some history, Biff and I run the show. Our company is named Callipyge Genetics, and that's our website, tenetbeef.com. On it, and we're not that old of a company. We actually started in February of 2024. So to give you the history of our company, I have to back up a little bit and tell you what happened previously. I farmed, when I left graduate school, my wife and I went farming and ranching with my in-laws, her parents in Eastern Oregon. And we had about 800 cows, 1,600 sows, and about 1,000 ewes. We had feedlots for the cattle and the sheep, and of course the hogs were farrow to finish. We also had quite a little bit of acreage that went along with the operation, and I was with them for 12 years before Washington State University asked me to come and be on their faculty. Part of this, in becoming a faculty member with Washington State University, I took a project from private industry into faculty to try to research it. And also, I negotiated to get to keep my cows. And we'd raised cattle for most of my life, all of Biff's life, and I wanted to continue doing that. To do that, we leased property and hired people to handle the cattle. I would get up and see the cattle about 5 in the morning, feed them in the dark, and then if I had to do something in the evening after work, it was also dark, but we got to see them on weekends. But I had several good hired hands doing that, and that kind of plays into this situation. In Oklahoma and Texas, they have carcass contests, and they're a pretty big deal. We don't have anything like that in the Pacific Northwest, but I saw in Oklahoma carcass contests that a family won the sheep carcass contest 3 years running, and they had lamb chops about, over 3 square inches. Normal lamb chop is about 1 square inch, and so that was kind of unique. And so I wanted to study that. So it started in '86 with a carcass contest, and this family won it 3 years in a row. I called the family, Moffett was their name, Piedmont, Oklahoma, and he swore he wasn't injecting his sheep with hormones, but he was going to be taken out of the contest and never be able to do it again because everybody thought he was. So up at WSU, I started the Heavy Muscle Sheep Project in 1989. That's the year I was hired as a professor with them. And the team I put together was several at WSU. I was the principal investigator, U.S. Sheep Experiment Station, Utah State University was our genetics lab. It was Noel Cockett's lab. It was all female at the time. That will come up in a minute. Wyoming and University of Idaho. University of Idaho is 8 miles away from WSU. So whenever animal science departments do things, we kind of work together. This was what we saw in the upper left-hand corner are the loin pictures. You'll notice that there's very little fat in the heavy muscled sheep on the left, and that is a really good lamb chop for a normal lamb, but you'll notice the fat difference. The shoulder in the lower left-hand corner, in the lamb industry, the shoulder is always kind of a problem. There's a lot of fat in it, and it's real small. Normally they grind it up, cut it up. And with this project, you can tell that shoulder was a big difference. Of course, the carcasses had a third more lamb per animal at the same weight. And so that's what we found. This is the ram that was throwing the anomaly. His name was Solid Gold. He was a show ram, and that was lucky. We discovered that it was a gene of sheep, and the Utah group named it Callipyge. A little bit of scientific geek humor. It was a all-female lab, and when I would go there, they were wonderful to work with, but whenever I'd enter the lab, they say, "Oh, we smell testosterone." And of course, when I was messing around with them, I'd say, "Wow, there's a lot of estrogen in here today." And so I got to work with them, the wonderful group. The word Callipyge is Greek, and it's what girls say about boys on the beach. It means nice rear end, basically. Just say it nicely. So it was a little bit of scientific humor that went a little bit too far because the gene ended up being pretty important, and I'll explain that too. But the problem, so the inheritance of that gene took me 9 years to figure out. It's like color blindness in people. It's almost maternally muffled, a little bit different, but But when it came from the ewe, the lamb stayed normal. When it came from the ram, the gene turned on. So it's still the only gene in the animal kingdom that we know that it turns on. It's inheritance. And that started, it's a foundation block. Callipyge is a foundation block of a science called epigenetics on how genes turn off and on. 10% of the time, these Callipyge lambs were extremely tough. And I'm talking boot tough, not just a little chewy, but they're terrible. And the U.S. sheep industry came to WSU, and I got called in by the president, which is not that good when you're a professor, and they asked me to stop working on it. So that was a pretty depressing time for me, and also a really learned time for me, because I found out that I'm not in charge, God's in charge. Okay, so I stopped research on Callipyge in 1999. I handed off Callipyge to two scientists, one at Stanford and one at MIT. The MIT guy I knew pretty well. They study earthworms. They're an earthworm group. And genes don't matter, whether earthworms or cattle or sheep or plants or people, they are all the same. They won the Nobel Prize for gene silencing, and I got written up in their article because they were both in their upper 30s, and normally to win a Nobel Prize, these guys are significantly older than that. And in their interview, they said, well, we won it because there's this dude in Washington that found the Callipyge gene. So, and that was pretty cool. Washington State, sorry. Basically, all the current treatments for cancer are due to gene silencing drugs. And every one of them ties back to Callipyge. Every single one. So I was looking for a bigger lamb chop, but God had a different plan for Callipyge. In 2000, I started looking about tenderness in cattle. They're funner to work with anyhow, but they're way tougher, by the way. But USDA, over the last 30 years, does summaries every other year of 50,000 consumers that eat beef. And then they list the top problems with what we have as an industry. Every year, for the last 30 years, tenderness has been near the top. Sometimes food safety is up there, and as it should be, but tenderness is that. In the grass-based production, they said 66% of the time it's too chewy. Commercially, 23% of the time it's too chewy. I'm going to give you a little bit of chromosome things here, and if you start glazing over, I'm going to move on fast. But cattle have 60 chromosomes, okay? And all chromosomes are made up of patterns of 4 ribonucleic acids. They're adenine, cysteine, guanine, and thymine. So everything about a cow, or you, or anybody else, are combinations of those 4 ribonucleic acids. Every time I work in this subject, I get goosebumps on my neck a little bit, because some people might have come from mud puddles, but I don't think we did. In fact, I wanted to show you something. When I left the Callipyge project, Utah State University gave me the DNA for 1,000 ewes in a test tube. You know, it's Rod's birthday today. Yeah, it is his birthday, and I was thinking maybe I should give him 1,000 ewes. That's all. That's it. That's what we deal with in the chromosomes and DNA. It's not very big. There are approximately 8,000 DNA markers in the cattle genome. In 1999, there were a lot less, and they allowed people to patent them, but they started coming up with markers so fast they no longer allow patenting. And all a marker is either a physical or a chemical method to break up chromosomes. So you get to see, in sequencing, you get to see what we call SNPs, but they're single nucleotide polymorphisms. And we read these breaks. They're just two RNAs sticking up, and we mark them. And so if we have an adenine and thymine pair, when they stick up, we'll either have two T's, two thymines, two adenines, or a TA or an AT. By doing this, we can use the marker to figure out how it makes a difference. That's how we mark DNA. There's very few of these 8,000 markers that are actually verified. People come up with them and they don't have a method to verify them. And so I started thinking, how can I develop a set of markers or samples that I can verify a marker or two or three for DNA tenderness? And so what I did with my own privately owned stockers and cow-calf herd was started collecting blood samples, and then we retained ownership on a lot of the calves all the way through the feedlot. I collected meat samples, then took them to, and then I cut a meat sample, bought it from Washington Beef in Toppenish, Washington, and then used a Warner Bachelor shear on them. Warner Bachelor shear is a little guillotine, and the way I did it was you take a sample from a steer. Normally you take it at the 12th rib. I froze them, and then when I got a couple hundred, then we thawed them out and hitched up some George Foreman grills, and then put in thermometers into them. Then when they got to 160 degrees, which is way overcooked, by the way, we took them off and then cut plugs out of them, and then used this little guillotine, Warner Bachelor shear, to tell the toughness of each sample. Each steak, normally we do 6 times, 6 plugs. So, and then I hired a laboratory, sequencing lab, paid for all the primers, time in the lab, contracted it, and technicians, and then I set out to sequence, trying to find one or a group, most time you work on groups, of the 8,000 markers, if I could find some that would line up to beef tenderness. Well, kind of a God thing happened, because the first day I was thinking this is going to take me a year or two, but the first day, the 5th set of DNA markers that I did came out 100% accurate for beef tenderness. The highest level of beef tenderness, not ranking, but just the highest level. So the 5th set on the first day of 8,000 markers. That's pretty amazing that happened. So the USDA beef quality grades, which you all know, were first being designed in 1926. They were developed, they were put into action in 1964. A lot of things have changed since 1964. I have, cars have, cattle have, but our quality grading system has not. It really was revolved around intermuscular fat, commonly known as marbling. The level of marbling is how we get paid now, but it's not a measure of tenderness. It never has been. We've known that for several decades, but it was all we had in 1964, and in my opinion, it needs to be changed now. So Tenet is a completely different paradigm in beef quality. It has nothing to do with marbling. And every once in a while, when I give one of these presentations, someone runs up to me afterwards and says, "But how does it relate to marbling?" So it doesn't relate to marbling at all, okay? Marbling, we've known for decades. If you look at different papers, they're either at the highest level, marbling is 10% correlated, and the lowest level is 2% correlated. So it's not highly correlated at all. If you rank American beef on a bell-shaped curve, a huge portion is 3 on a T1 to 10 basis. Luckily, there are only about 2 to 3% are 1s, because basically that was a tennis shoe to eat. But it tapers out into normally 2-3% are T10s. That's what Tenet is. Tenet actually has a few T9s in it too. It's just they are incorporated in there, but it's still between 2 and 5% of the whole industry. This is from my own herd of cattle. These are Warner Bachelor shear number. The numbers on the left aren't correct. I have to explain that a little bit because they have a new protocol with Warner Bachelor shear, and it was not my protocol. As I told you, I cut the steak, threw it in a freezer, waited until I had enough, George Foreman grill, all that stuff. Well, new protocol on Warner Bachelor shear is you collect the sample, you put it in the refrigerator for 23 days, then you freeze it, then you thaw it in a refrigerator for 3 days, then you cook it in a water bath to 160 degrees, then you put it back in the refrigerator and take your plugs out of it, 6 plugs, and then you let it warm up to room temperature, and then you do a Warner Bachelor shear. That is going to make the numbers completely different. But if you look at these numbers, they represent what I was doing, and they are a representative of my own animals. You'll see that the Tenet animals are pretty consistent over here. You also see there's kind of a range on the right, the red dots. Well, there are actually, those 3 top ones are cows that I bought that calved out that are not Tenet. Didn't know where the calves came from. And so, and the other ones in the middle are animals that are halfway to Tenet. And I'll explain that here in a few minutes with one of my questions. But you can see that between the upper 3 dots and the lower group of dots on the red, on the right, there's a significant difference in those animals and that beef. You also see that there's a significant difference in the lower group of dots on the right and Tenet. That is highly significant too. But if you take out the ones on the right that are halfway to Tenet now, and we call those, my family calls them mid-tens, you'll see the difference between those 3 on the top and the ones on the left that are Tenet. There is an outlier in the group, the bottom group on the right. It ended up having, it was a mid-10, and I don't know how it got there, but it was not an animal I had anything to do with. We started Tenet in February 2024, but it's great technology, but we were really struggling for relevance, let's put it that way. When you represent 2% of the beef industry, I thought it would take forever to catch on, and I was hoping it would. So we asked 3 global AI companies to check their bulls, and they allowed us to. We found not very many, but we found, 2, 3, 4, 5 per catalog, and they weren't interested in Tenet because they said if you have 50 Black Angus bulls, one's a Tenet, everybody's going to want that Tenet bull. 49 of the owners are not going to be happy with the other bulls and how many straws of semen they sell. So they didn't want to have anything to do with this. So I was working with a marketing young lady, and she sent me one of Kit's newsletters. I figured that out finally, Kit. I was reading his newsletter, and I was saying, you know, we have a lot of common thoughts here. I wonder if Kit would allow me to run his bulls. Well, I asked. He said no. And then I bugged him again. I think was it 4 times, something like that? Probably. Yeah, I wore him down. And finally he said, okay. So Biff and I did that. And I was fully expecting 5 bulls. We did about 100, I think 96 bulls. And I thought, man, I'll be lucky if I get 5. I'm going to write down a sales pitch for Kit. If I get 5, I'm going to hard sell him. Well, we got the data back, and 67% or 57 of his bulls certified as Tenet. This is staggering. It's way different than anybody else. PCC and Callipyge Genetics are now working together to help the American beef industry. We can change the paradigm. We can assist the industry in producing a better product. And that's what our goal is. And our secondary goal is helping you make money. Because I think it's Kit's primary goal. But that's a goal of mine too. Those that have Tenet, I want to have a value-added product and have a better chance in surviving when this cattle cycle might go upside down again. So our website, tenetbeef.com, will soon have a spot in it that advertises the bulls, AI bulls and live bulls. And obviously PCC is going to be very prominent in that. We're also going to set up a site on our website for females and to help you in marketing animals. And we are trying to put things together so that you have better markets for your Tenet animals. Some common questions that I always get about Tenet that I'll this answer now, so you don't have to ask them. Is Tenet the same as Neogens, the AAA, and Zoetis? It is not. No, not even close. I know the person that patented the leptin genetic group, and it was put together to rank animals and not to find the highest degree. And because there's so many SNPs involved, there's thousands and thousands of SNPs, it's not very accurate. In fact, at times it's 30% accurate. We've several times discovered bulls that are ranked 10 using leptin that are actually 1s. And that's significant detrimental to the industry, that's for sure. And they continue to sell those straws, even though they were told that they are a 1, basically a Nike shoe. And this particular bull I'm thinking of right now sold 94,000 straws for 4 years straight. Almost every Black Angus in the AI catalogs is related to this bull. So you think that's not detrimental to the industry? It is bad, in my opinion. What is the heritability of Tenet? It's moderately to high. Normal cattle, which would be, if you're ranking a T3, would be in 2 generations, the majority of Tenet. As long as you continue to use Tenet bulls like the ones out back here, you would continue to stay Tenet.
What's the financial benefit
of being certified Tenet? We did a seminar at WSU in 2011, and the economics guys at that time said it was $400 additional profit if you have a guaranteed tender animal. I called those guys in 2022, and they both said now it's $800 per carcass. We all know how the prices have gone up since 2022, so it's higher. Are there population groups or breeds higher in Tenet? Yes. PCC animals out back are. They are approaching 75%, I believe. And we have seen some advantages in Red Angus. My theory on that is Red Angus is a pretty new breed from 1903. That's when they established. They must have had several foundation sires that were Tenet. And also, being red, you can't hide anything really into a red animal. They're pretty pure still. And if you have black hair, things can disappear in there. But in the Red Angus breed, it's a pretty pure breed right now. I should have altered this slide about 4 days ago, Biff. Did we find the first Wagyu? Yeah. We've done bunches, but we found a Wagyu. How can I test for Tenet? There's a couple of ways. You can go online, and these are blood collection outfits that we put together. This is how I did my research in the past. You can also use tissue samples, and there are some really easy method samples now. And they are actually showing less corruption than some of the blood sample cards. The cards have a tendency to, when you're working around a chute, you know what happens around a chute, right? They get a little bit of mud if you're lucky in there sometimes. Well, that throws off DNA. So tissue samples are working very well too. We don't sell the tubes. You'll have to get those elsewhere. Can we test semen straws? We have a little experiment going on right now. Right now, I'm saying they're much more expensive because we have to charge about $70 because it takes 2 labs to extract the DNA from semen and then send it on to sequencing. Why does Pharo Cattle Company have so many certified Tenet? PCC has been selecting for low metabolizable energy for a long time, 30 years. Easy keepers is what they're called in the industry. What I found with my own animals, when we pooled animals to go into winter, like 4 or 5 of us would pool animals and go on to corn stalks. In March, when we pull them out right before calving, my animals normally would look like they've been at a buffet. They're very easy keepers. And a lot of the other guys' animals would come out looking like a hat rack and needing to have some additional groceries. Those are easy keepers. Kit's been looking for these animals for 30 years. And I think that's why he has so many. And in my opinion, Kit and I were destined to meet up. I'm glad I bugged him as much as I did, and we're pretty good friends. And I think we're going to change the beef industry in a positive way. I know we are. And then I'm ready for your questions.
Your blood card costs $20. What does your tissue test cost?
$20 also. Yes, sir.
Add one on your taste versus your tenderness. Is there any correlation to that? Or I've eaten a lot of beef that was really tender and it tastes like cardboard. It just has no taste whatsoever.
Yeah, the question was, does taste and tenderness go together, basically, right? Well, most of the time, the flavor in beef has a lot to do with some fat. In select animals, they normally have enough to have that flavor and juiciness. And so we're not seeing in taste panel tests any problem with ours. Yes, ma'am.
In a packing plant, if you get them to change the grading system, how do you see being able to choose for the tenderness in the packing plant?
Okay, the question is, how are we going to get the packing plant to change towards tenderness?
Well, to be able to acknowledge it.
Acknowledge it. Yeah, it'll take some time, and I believe it's going to take a big player to make it happen, like a Tyson or somebody, to actually make the USDA grading system change. We're working towards a branded beef product. That's a big step along the way, and we will have that before long. I think it's going to take some time. Yes, sir.
What would you say would be the easiest way to test
your herd bulls that we have.
The herd bulls. The question is, what's the easiest way to test your current herd bulls? They would be, take tissue samples and then send them to us and we'll be able to do them.
What all does that entail, the tissue?
Hey Frank,
There you go. Show them how it's done.
the tissue sample gun and this little vial right here. So you just take this little vial, you put it right in this tissue seal right here, holder, and you click it like this, and then you poke it right in here, and it's like you're putting an ear tag in.
That's right.
It's real easy to do, and it's so much quicker than the blood cards. I've done hundreds of blood cards. You gotta cut their ear, wait for it to bleed, try to get the blood on the card. And so these really make stuff a lot faster.
Get that gun back is where?
The cheapest place to buy your stuff is through Neogen. The gun and the Neogen samples are the cheapest place I found them right now. You can get them at Valley Vet too, but I think Neogen's got the cheapest.
You hit the ear like an implant and you punch it like a ear
You
tag.
just punch through the edge, the corner of the edge. You gotta be careful if you double punch it, like if you get the ear folded over and get two punches in there, depending on some places you send it, they won't take it because it's got two, they think you did two animals.
Yeah.
And then it's got a little red, it's green right now at the center of this thing. When you punch it, it turns red, so you can tell. And you can see the tissue sample, it's a clear vial on this tube. If you want to look at it, come look at it after Frank's done.
Thank you. Thank you for showing that. Yes, sir.
How does your Tenet percentage of tenderness compare, I mean, how does it rate with the shear test? What's the percentage of?
The question was, how does Tenet relate to the shear, the Warren Butcher shear? The Tenet is a 10. So the new protocol from USDA has just come out. So I don't know what the numbers will be. I assume they're going to be probably in the 8 to 6 pound range. Those are pounds up there, so you can see, and they range in my research up to 38 pounds on some of the tough animals. So those were some you don't want to have on your plate very much. Yes, sir.
Can you repeat the heritability of Tenet? You say it was moderately high, or?
It's moderate to high. In 2 generations, you can switch your whole herd. I call it moderate. I think some geneticists will call it high.
So what does that mean? Like if we buy a bull that's Tenet tomorrow, are we guaranteed? There's not a guarantee that the calves will be Tenet if the cow is Tenet as well?
There's no guarantee. They would have to be checked.
Well, if the bull is Tenet and the cow is Tenet, will it be Tenet?
Yes.
Moderately high or for sure?
No.
100%.
100%. And all the ones we've done. 100%. And if you can continue to buy PCC Tenet bulls and continue to put them on your Tenet cows, you continue to have Tenet animals.
If you go ahead and test your herd then, can you use your trademark as a Tenet Beef, or do we have to buy that trademark from you?
We're working on that now. If you talk to me in a month, we'll have that worked out. There's large producers that want to go into a branded beef program with Tenet, but we don't want to hinder the smaller producers either that have like a grass-based product now. There was someone in Missouri that came up and said, we're not going to be interested in selling our calves anywhere because we take our beef to grocery stores and farmers markets. And so we need to somehow make a niche for both. We don't want to hinder anybody. So yes, we'll find a position for you.
I wanted to back up a little bit. Your question about heritability, it's not like black and red or those sort of things. It's a totally different thing. But what we found, and within our producers, we've tested thousands of head of cows, calves, bulls. The original testing was our AI sires, and some of those, 30%, 20%, are not Tenet. However, I noticed now that we cataloged and are testing our sons, most of those non-Tenet bulls are producing 50% Tenet calves. But that's because we have high levels of Tenet in all of our cow herds and our bulls. So, if you have been using PCC bulls for 5 years, you've probably got a high level of Tenet you don't even know about. And you can almost guarantee Tenet to Tenet is going to be Tenet, Tenet to high Tenet or high, mid 10 is probably going to be Tenet. So it's that's kind of surprised me. I've told people, I said, don't just back away from a non-Tenet bull in this sale, because he's probably close.
Yes.
Most of them are going to be close. So, and I think that message was heard in Texas and Missouri. For a while I thought, okay, everybody's going to buy nothing but the Tenet bulls, but that's not the case. These other bulls are going to be close. The other thing, Frank answered his own question about why PCC has so many Tenet, and I think that's right. It goes back to maintenance energy.
Yep.
Maintenance energy is a factor of growth, milk, and frame size. And when you go to ABS or Select Sires or any of those outfits, they do everything opposite of us. It's all growth, all size, all milk. And it's no wonder, I think we're going to find more Tenet in herds around the country than Frank ever thought we were going to. He just started at the wrong place.
Yeah.
But, PCC has never selected for anything. I mean, we select for low maintenance animals, so we can have more cattle out there on the same acres. So it's the same theory that Frank has. I see it differently. That's a big word you used, metatype.
Metatype. Oh, now you scrambled me. I've been up since 2:30, so now I'm scrambled.
Cow can have a lot of Tenet influence in a non-Tenet bull situation.
Yeah. You remember in that screen that had all the dots on it? Those ones on the right in the midway, I said that are mid-10. The bulls that aren't Tenet out here are probably all there. So they're halfway there, in my opinion. There's probably some that aren't, but I would say vast majority are there that aren't Tenet.
How much difference does this make to the consumer if Joe Schmo's eating a Tenet steak at a chain restaurant? Is he going to say, this is the most tender steak I've ever eaten? Or is it take somebody in a taste test rating this one, well, I think this one's a little better than that one? I mean, what's the magnitude of the difference?
There's a highly significant difference between the average beef in America, which is a 3, and a mid-10. And there's those dots on the right-hand side, those red ones down low. And there's a highly significant difference between the mid-10 and Tenet. So there is a huge difference between a normal beef steak and a Tenet steak. Now, you guys have been eating Tenet maybe for quite a long time if you're raising PCC animals. So it's not, you may not say that it's the most tender steak I've ever had, because you've done yourself a service by doing what you're doing. However, with Tenet, it makes it consistent. You're always going to have the same. So you eliminate all the toughness from the variability is what you do.
But you think an average consumer will
Yes.
notice the difference?
Yeah. They'll notice the difference, believe me.
I agree, and you've read what I've written. When I go to a restaurant, I will not order a steak unless it's a flat iron or a fillet, because I know those are good. I've had a lot of ribeye steaks that I don't want to pay that much money for something I just don't like. I'd rather eat chicken. So I think it's going to, if you go to this restaurant and this is Tenet certified beef and you like it, you're going to go back to that restaurant. Those of you that are selling grass-fed or corn-fed beef directly to the consumer, this is a no-brainer for you guys. Jump right in there, test all your cows, all your calves, all your bulls, and make something happen, because once they taste it, they're not going to want, they don't want anything else. I mean, that's my vision. We're working, on a program, where we can put together some branded beef deals. Tim Goodnight, you want to wave your hand, Tim? Tim's working with us. Tim was with PCC for many years, and many of you know him. But we're working with Tim on this, what we call he calls it the NewCo, but a new company, that's what it's focused on, and that's what Tim's doing with other companies right now. So eventually, the obvious people that are going to benefit first are going to be the ones dealing directly with the public, the consumer. But I think we're eventually going to have, a home for lots of calves. I mean, thousands and thousands of calves. But that won't just happen overnight. It's kind of like which comes first, the chicken or the egg, and we're working on it. And we've got, as far as I'm concerned, we've got the best man in the world working on this for us, and I'm glad that I called the people with Tyson Foods, because we had worked with them with our grass deal. They didn't even return my call or my emails or anything, and then I'm glad. I thought Tim's the next guy I'm going to call.
Yep.
And Tim, you why don't you come down here? You don't want to talk to this group.
Well, we can.
No, I just want you to say a little bit, and then go home. Come on in the sale ring here.
So most of you probably know me. I'm Tim Goodnight. I'm based out of Gordon, Nebraska. I'm the VP at Open Range Beef. We're a small regional packer. We process about 50,000 head a year in 3 programs. 2 of those programs are organic. One of them is a newly launched program, Terra Fortis. It's a premium natural grass-fed program. And with that, and I think what the story Kit wants me to tell is we were out in the East Coast, just outside of Boston, at one of our distributors here a few weeks back, and we did a cutting and with the premium grass-fed program that we're launching. It was a low choice program, and we were getting some of the pushback in that meeting after the presentation about wanting it to be a high choice program. Nyman and some of these others right now are launching their CAB program, and so it's grading upper 2/3 choice. And so in this meeting, I said, well, let's do this. They're a distributor, so they've got grain-fed, grass-fed, a number of different programs to choose from. I said, go get what you think is your best beef and cut it against this beef that we brought out to test. And we had a good producer, and we tested a number of our animals finishing. I think we had 8 come back as Tenet. So I selected one of the Tenet animals. We brought out a rib roll. And I don't go into these cuttings blind. I had tried a rib and a strip from this animal, and I knew it ate excellent. And so that gave me the confidence to say, go and get what you think is the best. So I won't name the group that they got it from, but they got a 45-day wet age prime rib roll and cut it against the Tenet, the low choice Tenet rib roll that we brought out. It was grass-fed as well. And they were blown away, and it was more tender. The rib roll we brought out was more tender than the prime animal. And that goes back to what Frank talked about, obviously, in terms of the heritability. Excuse me, not the heritability, but the correlation between the marbling and the tenderness. So we've got a number of these scheduled throughout April and May. We'll be out at West Coast Prime May 20th. That's another big distributor we work with on the West Coast. And we'll keep going through these tasting. So that's the background.
Thanks, Tim. And that kind of addresses your thought. I think if you or your family or neighbors, anybody is able to test a prime grain-fed steak to a grass-fed Tenet steak, and they're impressed, they're all going to be impressed.
How does it affect the crossbreed? Like your hybrid breeders?
Well, this blew me away. Our Texas sale was mostly heat-tolerant composites, crossbred bulls, with Mashona, Senepal, Thule, and we had the highest percentage of Tenet bulls in that sale than anywhere else. So, it depends on the cross. Those breeds there, heat-tolerant breeds, have never been selected for growth. They've been selected for survival. So you cross Rob Pierce told me tonight, he bought a couple of, Fleckby Red Angus cross bulls, and he knew they weren't gonna be Tenet, but they were. You know, it can happen.
If you blood test for pregnancy, can you use that same blood vial then for Tenet?
I wouldn't.
You wouldn't?
I mean, he doesn't want a vial of blood.
But you can't put that on, sample on their car.
Well, you could.
3 drops, yeah, on a card, yeah, you can't do that.
Check out the tool that Ryan has. I think that's an Allflex tool, right? Allflex makes those ear tags. They make this tool
Way easy.
It's a whole lot easier than slicing the ear.
How forgiving is it? Because we have the public and everybody wants their steak well done, and can they screw up the tenderness? You know what I mean?
The question is, can tenderness be screwed up by cooking? The answer is yes. Hopefully not too much. I've done that a couple times. If it's cooked normally, we'll be fine.
Are you looking in the future to have a feedlot that would feed these cattle and then send them to this smaller packer, or what are you looking at?
Yes, Tim is heading that up. I gotta be honest with you, I do like 1 or 2 things, about that much, really good. And I try to surround myself with people that help me, because the rest of the things I don't know that much about. What Tim is doing is instrumental in the future of the cattle industry and Tenet. He's integral, trying to surround ourselves with what we have with PCC. We're going to with Tim and that kind of thing.
I think, and Tim thinks also, that this is going to be more than just grass finished. I mean, we have the right kind of animals, you know, early maturing grass finishing type animals. That's what works best in the cow herd and for grass finishing. But I think we will eventually have grain finished, and maybe before we have much grass finished, we may have grain. The grass-fed beef industry, you guys can do it on your own, but putting together a big project like a 10,000 head feedlot, that's not easy to do. And that's why I'm thinking that we will have feedlots that want to specialize in that.
So from a commercial cow herd situation, until this Tenet progresses enough to become a program, you're not gonna really realize any much more profit out of your herd, are you?
Not at your age.
The question is, going from normal to Tenet at his age, you see enough profit? I can't answer that. I will say that anytime you can increase the quality of beef, it's the correct way to go.
That is correct. But, you know, that kind of depends on, you know, the doors that open for Tim. You know, once some of those doors start opening, we're going to be looking for a source of calves.
Right.
And once that happens, you know, those calves are going to be worth the premium because everybody's going to make money on them. But you're right that it's not there now. I mean, it's not something that you can say, well, I've got Tenet calves, but if you have Tenet calves, I guarantee you, in the PCC network of customers, there's people out there that'll pay extra for your Tenet calves because they know how to market the beef.
Well, I know a lot of times sale barn, when they find out they're mine, they bring a little more money because of the cattle I raise and the way they feed out and everything.
Well, there's a market for them already. You know, everywhere we've been, Texas and Missouri, where can we find some females? Where can we find some calves? You know, there's a market. So don't blow it off, because you might not want to be selling beef, but you might have a neighbor that does, and he can get rich off of your calves.
Seems like a lot of these genes, can it be epigenetically turned on or turned off, this kind of gene?
This gene, this marker system only marks Tenet. Epigenetics is a different science, basically, that in the human industry, in the human pharmaceutical industry, they're trying to turn off cancer, basically. Tenet doesn't have anything to do with epigenetics. So.
I've noticed a high correlation between the tenderness scores that PCC's been using for, I don't know, 13, 14 years, were developed by Dr. Alan Williams. And I've been using those myself, and I see a high correlation between those tenderness scores and the Tenet cattle in that catalog.
So in this catalog, you are seeing that. So we've not looked for that correlation in any of the bulls we sold this spring, but we did go back to our herd sires, AI sires, and we looked for a correlation there, and we didn't see it. You know, I would hope it would be there. You know, it should be there, but we didn't see it with our AI sires, and that's just something that Ryan or somebody can maybe put together. I'm glad you said that, because that supports both areas.
It should.
It should. We do see where you have a DNA test for the enzymes that break down the meat. You know, there's a fairly good correlation there with Tenet, but that's because that's part of Frank's protocol.
Can you go a little bit deeper into the markers and recessive and dominant and some of that techie?
It's not there.
Yeah, the markers are not recessive dominant. It's a set of markers that just light up the pairs of RNA. And I can't, of course, divulge what the markers are or anything like that, but there's a large number of SNPs involved, thousands. So, and it takes an equation to read it, and that's at home in the vault.
That's your secret sauce.
Yeah.
I get that question all the time, you know, about dominant, recessive, percent heritability. I mean, those are questions that can't be answered in this case. You know, you and I understand black, red, horn pole, you know, some of these things. This isn't that. This is, you know, there's a whole bunch of markers out there that have to be checked off. And if every one of them is checked off, it's Tenet. And if one of them is not checked off, it's just not Tenet. It's just yes, no. But I'm telling you from personal experience that a lot of the animals here and in my herd at home that are not Tenet are really close.
I see a lot of sons of real McCoy or Tenet sires. Was real McCoy a Tenet sire?
I don't think we know yet.
We don't know. You don't
I would bet you $1,000 he is. But he's sitting in a tray at Frank's place waiting for more straws of semen. You know, that's the trouble with straws. Straws, you know, real McCoy's no longer alive, so all we have is this straw of semen. And Ryan has been chomping at the bit, but I bet he has to be.
Yeah, if anybody has any more semen, they can send Frank, it'd be real helpful.
Well, they're fixing to come to woolly mammoths, so.
Okay.
Why can't we bring you back?
Oh boy, that's out of my league.
Robert.
Spoke about mid-10. Is that something that can be identified?
We were going to try to do that, and we actually trademarked the term mid-10 in an effort to put enough markers together to market. But we didn't have a chance to, and we won't in the future unless I find an extra $4 million and get my own sequencing lab back together again. And it's just not in the cards.
So if you butcher a 10-year-old cow or a 2-year-old steer and they're Tenet, it's tender?
Yeah, actually they've found that during this last week, they did some cutouts with 3 to 6-year-old cows, and they kept just the loins, but they were sorry that they didn't take the rounds too, because they were very nice products.
What's the turnaround time from when you send the tissue sample off to when you get the answers?
We have to get a group of 384 samples together before we can sequence. And I set them up, or Biff and I set them up, and then we send off at least 364. We can send off 1,000 at a time, but we have to have 364. Once they get to the lab, it's between 2 and 4 weeks is what the lab says. A couple months ago, we found some SNPs that we weren't using, basically. There's thousands that we don't use. But we were able to set up a system of controls. So when these SNPs show up a certain way, 3 or 4 SNPs that we weren't using anywhere else, that lets the lab know that everything is cool with the whole box, with the whole group. And so it's really sped up. In fact, I think this last group, wasn't it about 10 days?
Let's say 14.
Let's say 14 days, he says. Biff is my technology guy, and so when we get this data on each animal, there's probably 3 pages, single-spaced, nothing but TT, AA, CA. Biff puts some what's called a macro on it and starts sorting it. And I have to tell you, Biff has 3 jobs. He works at least 40 hours a week. He has 3 kids, so he's carting them around. And then at night, he works with Tenet and me. So that is sometimes a limiting factor. He gets them out within a day or 2, but it doesn't take that long right now.
I can take a tissue of 1 mug and send it in.
Yes, sir. Yeah, but you have to, but you'll be waiting for 383 to fill out. But most of the time we have.
Well, you may be the last one for that.
Yeah, or here might be the 384th that we were waiting for, and it's gone. So.
Is there any correlation to the one breed of cattle has more Tenet than others, or has there been enough to contrast that?
We've seen that the South Poles have quite a few, and the Red Angus have more than other breeds right now. And that's what I was explaining. They are a new breed, 1903, and one or 2 of their foundational sires must have been Tenet. I think you'll see it in some of Kit's bulls too. There are a lot of Red Angus.
Is the turnaround on the tissue samples have any advantage over the semen or the blood card?
The tissue samples and the blood cards are identical. The semen straws, we have to wait until there's 96. And then I have to set up an extraction lab and do that part, and then that's shipped to the sequencing lab. Our sequencing lab doesn't want to play with semen. That's the way it is, which is weird, but that's the way it goes.
You just send 1 straw of semen and can it be just sent to mail?
Yes, we don't need it frozen. The DNA doesn't change, and I know we have about 50, I believe, right now.
56 or something.
Yeah, 56 or something down in my wife's downstairs refrigerator in the drawer that every once in a while she mentions to me. I told her when we get to 96, there's going to be a lot less.
And that's where real McCoy is sitting, right there in that tray.
How many, have you ever had a false reading on the blood card test? Like in Bangor, we get false readings every once in a while.
We get corrupted readings every once in a while when there's like some dirt or manure or something else in there. And we've had a couple of tissue samples that it looked like there's no tissue in the tube. And that's a false reading. We don't see anything on those. So, but that's not hard to do. I mean, they're jumping around quite a bit. If you're not careful, you're going to miss them. So make sure there's something in that tube before you send them to me.
If I understand you right, let's say I wanted to test 20 eggs, I can send you those samples, but you have to wait till you have a certain number to go to the lab.
That's correct. We need to wait until 384 at least.
Maybe I missed something, but what's the cost on that, you say?
$20 per sample. And the 384, I mean, you can't believe how many samples he's had sent in since we started talking about it in Texas, and then Missouri, and then here. So don't wait for him to tell you we need your straw or your samples, get them sent in. You know, it's kind of like, I don't know, if you don't play, you're not going to win anything. You know, if you don't take your samples and send them in, you're not waiting on anything. He'll get them back quicker if you get them in.
I ordered blood test samples from you, so it's still okay to use those besides the tissue sample?
Yes, you can use the blood cards. They're just fine. That's all my research was done on blood cards, and that's why we still use them. But what I'm hearing and seeing is the tissue samples are just easier while the animal's in the chute. When you nick the ear to get 3 drops of blood on a blood card, and for instance, the cow backs up, that cuts off the blood supply. And so you're sitting there waiting for a drop of blood to come out of a cow's ear, standing in front of her, you know. And so once she steps forward, then you start getting drops of blood.
What's wrong with pulling it from the rear like the bank?
Well, you can take some tailhead blood. A lot of smaller producers don't do that, but it's very, just take some of that if you want.
Make sure they're dry samples too.
Yeah, that's Biff just pointed out, we need those samples to air dry. Don't get a whole bunch of blood on there and put them in a Ziploc bag, because some of them get pretty ugly. We need them dry.
Is there any sanitary procedure you need to do on that ear before you take a tissue sample? Or do you just take the ear and stab it and go from there?
Most people just go from there, just stab the ear, but being a scientist, I'd say Clorox wipe it, dry it, and then do it, but yeah, that ain't gonna happen.
Alcohol swab, like say, you got one cow behind another, they have to shit all over the head. You gotta clean that ear off.
Yeah.
Alcohol swab, wipe down is not gonna affect that tissue clean.
You're correct. Just wipe it down and then dry it off. We don't want any bleach. No bleach. That's not good. So I thought that's what Clorox was. Yeah, it is. So you had to dry it off. Yeah.
With marbling, it's not related to tenderness, but does the tenant have any relationship that more tenant animals marble better? Is there anything in that direction?
I don't know that answer. I haven't really looked at it.
Ours will.
Yeah.
I mean, we have low maintenance animals that stop growing up and start getting fat. That's marbling.
Yeah.
But, you could have a high growth, high maintenance animal that might happen to be Tenet, and that may not be the case there.
I was looking at the catalog on these bulls. A lot of the Tenet bulls are classified as the easy fleshing bulls all the way through. In fact,
there's not a hard fleshing bull out there.
I know. There's no rails out there, that's for sure.
I just wanted to point out, somebody asked about just dropping a TSU in the mail. And I know you have to put them in a bubble envelope.
Yeah.
Mail, and if you put them in a regular envelope, the mail sorter will shred it. It won't get to you.
Yeah, it's a good idea to put the tissue samples in some kind of a bubble wrap or something. In my neck of the woods, it's not unusual to find a piece of mail that's been run over. It has a perfect tire print in it.
Why did the Wagyu not, they're noted for tenderness.
No, they aren't.
Yeah, we're actually working with some of the Wagyu breeders. When they brought over the Japanese semen, they chose to put that semen into the biggest, growthiest, highest maintenance cattle in the Black Angus industry, because the Colby beef is not very big. It doesn't mature very fast, and they were trying to speed things up. They shot themselves in the foot, and they're trying to get out of it now with Tenet testing, a lot of them. So been kind of eye-opening.
The Wagyu is known for tremendous amount of muscling, or marbling, but not tenderness. Did you find one animal? He did find one Wagyu that is Tenet last week. So these others meeting, he says, I haven't tested a Wagyu yet that's Tenet. When we do, we're all going to get rich. Are you rich?
Not yet. I'm going to try to make a trademark agreement with that guy, for that one bull.
How many Wagyu did you test before you found one?
Hundreds. Yeah, actually, the Wagyu group tried to hire me to do them out of Washington State. That's one of the big Wagyu areas up in Washington State, the RR branded product. They have problems.
What about Akalushis, red?
Akalushis,
I'm not familiar with that breed.
it's the same, it's just a red,
Oh,
red Wagyu.
Yeah, I'm not, yeah. Same boat, probably. You know, the Kobe beef, they don't sell steaks. They sell it in Japan very thinly sliced, and then you cook it at your table in hot liquid, either oil or hot water. The steak thing is an American deal, not Japanese. I think we're done.
Let's give Frank a big hand. I do think, unless something happens that we're not aware of, this will be the biggest game changer in the history of the beef industry. And, don't wait because you're too old to get started. Get started for the next generation. A lot of our producers are Tenet testing all of their cows, heifers, bulls. I mean, we're serious about this, aren't we, Ryan? Some of us are nuts about it. I'm nuts about it. I appreciate you coming out here. I hope it was worth your time.